In the centre of a massive Ministry of Defence training ground is an archaeological site that is cordoned off and looked after by English heritage. Grimes Graves is a collection of mine shafts dating back almost 5,000 years. Over a 90-acre area here, there are over 400 shafts dug into the chalk bedrock, reaching down into seams of flint. The shafts were dug to a depth of 40 feet, an incredible depth when you consider the tools available at the time. The flint was used to produce more tools for hunting and living, a practice that continued for 2,000 years until the age of bronze tools took over. Visitors today are able to climb down 10 metres into one of the shafts to explore a historic site that is unique in this country.
Hi.
Susan, nice to meet you.
Welcome to Grimes Graves.
Thank you very much. It's quite a landscape. I'm not sure as I've seen anything like it before.
It's amazing, isn't it? It's a really special place.
And all these divots and bunkers all around, they're the actual flint mines, are they?
Yeah, each of these hollows is the top of one of the really deep shafts that goes down, and there's about 430 of them here at Grimes Graves.
Wow.
This is the only place in the country where you can actually go down into a Neolithic flint mine.
And we can do that right here, right now?
We can do that,
I
yeah.
was hoping you'd say that. Susan, it's great to be down underground here. What exactly is Grimes Graves then, and where does this name come from?
Well, Grimes Graves comes from the Anglo-Saxons, who gave this funny undulating landscape the name of Grim, who was their god. It's also known as Woden. So it's Grimes and then Graves, as in pits or hollows.
How important was flint in Neolithic Britain? I mean, what kind of things was it being used for?
Flint was the most important material for Neolithic people. It was used to make every single tool that you can imagine. It's kind of the Swiss Army knife of the Neolithic. You make axes, to make knives, to make cutting tools, boring tools, anything really where you needed a cutting edge.
Well, what was being used before flint was discovered and started being used for all these tools then?
Flint was in use for a really, really long period of time. So right back into the Paleolithic period, the Ice Age here in Britain. Before that, they were using stones to pound and break things, but not really working stone in such a way.
Mining is a hard graft, because I'm now thinking as well about the tools and machinery that they might have had available to them, and I'm guessing it's rudimentary, if anything, really.
The main tool that they were using was antler picks. So they were using these both to hammer out the flint and also to chip away at the chalk to expose areas of flint. Flint is quite a strange material in some ways. It's incredibly hard, but most of it appears in kind of nodules. So you're just taking out nodules from the ground that are already self-contained. And if you strike flint in the right place, it breaks in a very predictable way. So people would have been able to break up pieces quite regularly.
It's phenomenal to think that this hole we're stood in now was dug out by antlers.
Yeah.
Was this just another flint mine amongst a number of flint mines around Britain?
The flint here in this part of Norfolk is particularly high quality. I've got a little bit here to show you. You can see it's this beautiful black colour and it's got no impurities in it. It's really pure. And it seems that people were deliberately selecting this type of flint because it was very easy to work and created amazingly good and sharp and hard tools. So they were probably coming here deliberately. And the reason they were digging down so deep was here it occurs as something called floor stone, which is a complete layer of this very black, pure flint. So it's quite unique.
Once they'd established that it was here on this site,
yeah,
all shafts, they'd go down for that third layer.
They drop down their shafts to that layer and then go out sideways into little galleries and passages.
That's what we see around us here,
this is what you're seeing here, yeah. And then they're just following that floor stone and they're following the line of that floor stone and digging it out.
In a shaft like this, that would be open to the skies, but when you go off into these galleries, I imagine it's going to get pretty dark in there.
Yeah, the shafts themselves would stay relatively open to the daylight, so that's okay. But yeah, once you're off down the galleries, it's very dark. We have found very small little chalk lamps in some of these mines, and some of them have been found to have traces of oil in them. So it's quite likely they were taking in little lamps, or perhaps kind of burning tapers of some kind. The people would have been mining this flint, which is incredibly sharp. They probably would have had cut hands a lot of the time, but they'd have also been white, they'd have been covered in chalk dust. So people coming down here mining this flint, it would have been quite an experience, and you'd have known which people had been down mining because they would have looked so different.
Once the flint's been dug out from the ground then, what happens to it?
So once it gets up to the top of the shaft, they're working it into what we call rough-outs, which are the basic rough shape of an axe, just knocking off all the sides of the nodule that you don't want to be carrying around with you. And then those rough-outs are exported.
And do we know where these products might have gone on to?
We know that it gets transported all across southern England. There's even a hint that perhaps it gets across to the continent, into France. And because it's such good quality and because it's this lovely dark colour, it can be made into the most beautiful polished axes and things. People that do seem to have been transporting it a very long way from its origin here.
What happened for there to be an end to the mining of the flint here at Grimesgraves?
Grimesgraves is being dug in the very end of the Neolithic period, the end of the Stone Age. And what happens is that basically metal arrives from the continent. And of course, bronze as a material is very, very hard. It's much more efficient at doing things like cutting down trees. And it's also mouldable. You can make it into any shape you wish. So really metal takes over as the tool of choice. And here at Grimesgraves, flint mining stops.
Susan, thank you so much for bringing me down here. It is fascinating to come and learn exactly what's gone on here.
It's been a pleasure.
Last year, on this bleak and beautiful stretch of Norfolk coastline, a local man made an extraordinary discovery. Walking the beach at low tide, he found a bronze axe head. Nearby was a mysterious circle of eroded timber posts, half buried in the sand. And in the middle of the circle was a huge upturned tree stump. It's utterly intriguing, nothing quite like it's ever been found before, and everyone wants to know who built it, what it was for, and what it originally looked like. After months of deliberation, English Heritage have decided to excavate the circle, which is in the middle of a wildlife reserve and only accessible at the lowest tide.
It's a gateway with an upside-down tree on the edge of the sea.
But are you speaking?
In Home Bay.
Are you speaking for the birds?
Is it
that
a?
live
I'm speaking for the forest, my friend.
here? Well, who's speaking for the birds then?
Me.
I
Look,
mean, there's more of them than your forest.
look. Here's the birds.
Oh, so you're the chap that's got it.
Here's the birds.
We wonder where that went.
Here's the digger. I don't think that's a very funny remark at all.
Well, no, I think you're pathetic, that's why.
Well, you can think I'm pathetic, but I am not taking an ancient monument out of the ground.
Well, no, you're not.
denying
You're standing
anybody
behind the road. That's their take.
Ever. They did it on a native site.
Right.
You're native, I'm native. I know you're doing your job, and you know I'm doing my job.
Well,
But this shouldn't
as
happen.
we know, we were discussing earlier. I mean, if you're going to be down here tomorrow, are you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Peaceful.
Yeah. Good. Well, that's
Definitely
that's
peaceful.
the object of the exercise. You've got as much right to be here, and if you don't, you know, if you're at odds about what they're doing, they've got a job to do. But you know, if you've got as
See,
much right
as far
to
as I'm
say
concerned, you see,
you don't agree with it, but as long as it's done in a peaceful way, as you appreciate.
we don't need to nick their circle. We got them now. We still build them. There's still geezers wandering around building them. You know? Can you believe
I appreciate
that?
and understand your views. Don't worry, but
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm
you
just, you know, campaigners and policemen. We've got to say good morning.
yes, of course we have.
We're all part of
Of
the
course
same.
we have.
We're all part of the same battle, aren't we?
Yeah.
Buster, why did the Bronze Age people put their tree upside down in the first place? What
Because they were up against problems like us of seawater rising problems, deforestation for farmland problems, deforestation for smelting bronze gear, for then later iron gear. They had their own environmental problems in their own time. And interestingly enough, one of the few things that's been found in the circle that I've been told about is an axe. Because at those times, the bronze axe was the chainsaw of the old Neolithic man. Today, the chainsaws in the hands of the people who are raping the planet in the forests away and in the forests at home. And when the custodians of our sacred sites attack the most ancient living wooden monument on planet Earth with a chainsaw, it's time to say no!
Oh, yeah.
I've got a date with a pint. Come on.
The music succeeds and becomes an accompaniment to a tactical retreat.
far as we know, the Druids that we see today in the white sheets are essentially a product of the last century and a sort of romantic view of the Celtic twilight. None the worse for that, but I don't think we want to pretend they're Bronze Age in any possible shape.
After all these months of sweat and hard labour, this is the closest approximation we can get to what this wooden circle would have looked like 4,000 years ago. And it's only when you come inside it that you begin to get some kind of feeling of why those Bronze Age people would have been prepared to invest such an enormous amount of labour with such rudimentary tools in chopping that big tree down, lugging it however far they lugged it, and then inverting it and dropping it into this big hole. Because whatever it was for, it still has an enormous sense of power and mystery around it. You know that feeling that you get when you go into a dark and empty church and there's no one around? I don't know what that feeling's all about, but that's what you get here.
I knew it had a crime element, but I didn't totally see it as a crime book. And it was really my agent who read it, and she said, happily, you know, because sometimes your agent's not pleased with what you've written and they say things like, it's interesting. Have you got any other ideas? But she said, she said, it's crime. You need a crime name. So, you know, that's how I became Elly Griffiths. And even then, I certainly didn't think it was 15 books worth. The publisher who had published my Domenica de Rosa books didn't want this, actually, because it was crime. They wanted me to keep writing my sort of family sort of romances. So we went to a new publisher, Quercus, who were fantastic, and there I met my wonderful editor, Jane Wood, who's edited all the Elly books. But Jane was quite cautious, even though she did like the books, so she just bought 2 of them. So I knew there would be 2. So I didn't know there would be 15. I obviously hoped there would be a series. And it's a funny thing, isn't it? Because I think it's only in genre fiction, in crime or sci-fi, that you get a series. You know, if you write kind of literary fiction, which I suppose I was kind of doing before, you never get to write a sequel. You know, you just leave your characters there. So I didn't really think it would be a crime series. So here we are at book 15.
You start in a new genre and your previous publisher's going, we would rather you didn't. She wanted to know, how did you get your work noticed by agents or publishers?
Oh, Tanya, that's a hell of a question, a really good question. And as everybody knows, I think it is quite difficult. I had worked in publishing, so I was an editor, but for children's fiction, so a different part of it. So, but I have to say that probably did help a bit, because I kind of knew the path that you had to take, you know, and I knew that really you need an agent. If you want to be traditionally published, that is. Nowadays, there's so many other options to be published. You can self-publish, you can be ebook only, all sorts of, but for a traditional publisher, you really do need an agent. So I wrote to 6 agents, and I just, somebody advised me to write to them. saying something like, but not, you know, not as blatantly as this, say something like, I'm sending you the synopsis and first 3 chapters. I'm sending it to 6 other agents, because one thing an agent can't stand is the thought that another agent gets a good new author. So I'm saying to 6 other agents, but if you don't come back to me by the end of a couple of weeks, I'll just assume you're not interested. And that seemed to be quite a sort of bold way of putting it, but actually it sort of worked, because 3 of them did come back to me and were interested, and I went to meet them, and I really just went with the agent I liked best. She was called Tiff Leonis at Jean-Claude Nesbitt, and until very recently they were still my agent. So that did work for me, and I think it's important to remember that you're the one making the offer. You know, the agent will be nothing without new writers, so don't be too humble. Of course, don't be arrogant, but don't be too humble when you approach them. But of course, like everyone, like every writer on earth, I had my rejections. You know, that one was successful, so that led to my first published book, which was The Italian Quarter, as Domenica De Rosa. But before then, I had my rejections. I had one novel rejected for being, this is an actual quote because I've remembered it, for being redolent, dare I say it, of the 70s. And I wouldn't have minded, but the book was set in 1975. So it was set in the 70s, but they turned it down for being too like the 70s, so who knows.
But how about Nelson? Like, when and where did he come to you and become part of that creative mix that works so brilliantly?
Nelson, well, I always thought that Ruth, who's an archaeologist and academic from London, would need a sort of antagonist, somebody to who she could have a relationship with ultimately, but who would at first antagonize her and be kind of like her opposite. So I thought if she came from the south, he would have to be from the north, which, you know, I'm from Brighton, so everywhere's north to me. But and I decided he'd be from Blackpool. And I'm not sure where Nelson came from, but my editor Jane did say to me at one point, I wonder if Nelson's like your dad. And, you know, editors are very clever sometimes. I suddenly realised he was quite like my dad. In some ways, my dad was Italian, so he wasn't from Blackpool. But he was this quite strong character. He was a racing driver, so he drove too fast. He was a family man. He was also quite impatient about some things, but you know, very loving in other ways. So I think there is a lot of my dad in Nelson. So, yeah, partly my dad, partly my brother-in-law, partly from who knows where.
Sarah's asked about your interest in archaeology and when that started, and if writing the Roof Gallery series sparked that.
Yes, but in a way it started before that, and I have to give a bit of credit here to my husband Andy, because when I met Andy, he was a lawyer and he worked in the city, and we met in a city wine bar and all that, but he had always wanted to be an archaeologist, really, and I think he'd done law just because it was sort of safer option at the time, and had done really well in law, but had never really liked that sort of city world. But then when we had 2 young children, Andy said to me, yeah, you remember that thing about being an archaeologist? I'd quite like to try it. So he went back to university and studied archaeology, and you know, it meant our lives had to change in lots of ways, all of them good. And of course it was a chance remark of Andy's that really inspired the whole series. We were walking across Titchwell Marsh, sorry, on North Norfolk, and Andy happened to say that prehistoric people had thought that marshland was sacred because it's neither land nor sea but something in between. They'd thought of it as a bridge to the afterlife, neither land nor sea, neither life nor death, and that's where you find bodies there.
Catherine has asked about Cathbad, and how did he get his feet so solidly under the table in the Ruth Galloway books?
Great way of describing it, because he really did. I really don't know. Must be magic. It must be Cathbad magic. So in the first book, in The Crossing Places, he was really just meant to be a suspect, you know, another suspect. I hope an interesting one, and I'm particularly interested in sort of druidical religion and views. And I knew that, so The Crossing Places kind of is based on a real discovery of a henge, a North Norfolk, a Bronze Age henge. And when the archaeologist took the timbers away to be preserved and to examine them, local druids protested. I remember reading this in the papers, and I did think, only in Norfolk would you have local druids, probably Suffolk as well. I think definitely Suffolk as well. You would have local druids. So I was interested for that reason. I knew I wanted a druid character. Yes, he was only meant to be around for that one book. But I think he was a very interesting character to write about. And I really liked the way that he interacted with Nelson and Ruth. And I knew Nelson would be antagonistic to him at first, because he is antagonistic to a lot of people. But weirdly, at the end of The Crossing Places, there became this sort of strange friendship between Nelson and Cathbad. And I knew I wanted to write about that more. But and the third book, which is The House at Sea's End, Cathbad does something that I really hadn't planned, and that was when he became so established as a character. I was kind of quite keyed up to write this one, because I'd said, as you said, Lisa, I've given myself some wriggle room. I have just said it's the last one, but it is the last for a little bit. Well, I always like the one I've just written, and actually I got to say The Last Remains is really close to my heart, because I wanted to tie up a lot of things in this book, and I do hope that I've done it.
How did you get through writing process of 15 different books? And were there ever moments where you thought, I'm tired of this series, and felt like giving up?
Oh, no, not really, I have to say. But I've written a Ruth book a year for 15 years, you know, and also I've written some other books. So I've been writing 2 books a year for about the last 7 years, I think. So it's a lot of books, I have to say. I never got bored with writing the Ruth books and never got fed up with them. But I think part of the reason for saying I'm going to draw a halt for now is that I don't want to feel like that. I want to sort of finish them where I'm still really enthused with them. So I've never, and writing's what I love doing, I have to say, and I would be doing it anyhow, even if no one wanted to publish it, I'd still be writing. So it's rather lovely to think that people do want to publish them and read them. So I feel very, very lucky. So yeah, you know, when we're writing 2 books a year is quite hard going. You're always writing, you're always doing something. And of course, as we all know, it's not just the writing, it's the editing, it's the promoting, it's everything else that comes with it. You know, I know absolutely, you know that, Lisa. But it's been a great thing to do. But I might slow the pace a little bit now, but absolutely, just to reiterate, I haven't given up writing. I think I read something on social media, somebody put, I'm really sorry that Elly Griffiths has given up writing, which, so I just want to quickly say this isn't true at all. You know, I've stopped the Ruth series for now, but I'll still be writing at least a book a year. I've got ideas for new books, so, you know, I will still be writing. I really love the Detective's Daughter series by Leslie Thompson. If you haven't read those, do yourself a favour and read them, because the main character, Stella Darnell, is a cleaner who solves crimes. She's a fabulous character. I really like William Shaw's Alex Cooperdy series. I'm loving the new series by Val McDermott, the 1979 and now 1989 with Ali Burns. I think she's a terrific character. Phil Rickman, who writes a series about a vicar called Merrily Watkins, who's also the diocesan, hard word to say, diocesan exorcist. But one of my favourites, I have to say, if you're allowed to have a favourite of your own, is that Tanya in The Last Remains says, why would anyone pay to listen to an author talk? And I did laugh when I wrote that, because we're all different, aren't they? And we like that. Thank God people do not necessarily pay, but thank God people do come to listen to authors talking. But I just loved writing about a character who hated the whole idea, couldn't understand why anyone would do that.